So I don't know if anybody wants to start with any particular question. I mean, once we start into it...
Start because
sure.
This sort of been building and building in me. I've been seeking or on the spiritual path, or whatever you want to call it, since I was 14. And never really gone deeply into anything, but just sort of surface looking and looking. Anyway, it's come to the point where I realise that it seems I'm still totally identified with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really, even if I sit, I get moments, as I said to you before, I get moments of silence. Sometimes it's quite profound, but for short periods. And
right.
then sooner or later, it's like I'm in a fog of mind. That's how it seems to me.
Right.
And basically, I hope I don't die like this, because it's very frustrating to sort of half devote, not totally, but half devote your life to wanting to be one's real nature, and yet somehow always stuck in this sort of, Adyashanti says, the trance of the mind. I think he says that. Anyway, it's like being half asleep. That's the way I see it.
Right.
That's my dilemma.
Right. Well, from this non-dual perspective, I mean, we're not going to get rid of thought. I mean, thought is very much an expression of life. So in relation to thought, it becomes a consideration of what thought is actually telling us. So most people believe that their stories about life are somehow true. And yet, if we examine the whole process of thought, we can very easily see that thought can't be telling us the truth. So for instance, everyone who lives life for a relative amount of time, like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you will eventually start to say that everything in life is changing, because that's just a fact. I mean, we try to hang on to thoughts and they shift. We try to hang on to certain moods and they shift. We want our relationships to be a certain way and they shift. We want our job situations to be a certain way and they shift. And we want our bodies to be a certain way and they shift. So at a certain point, we will all announce to ourselves and the world that everything is changing. So, immediately we come to what actually all of the great religions are saying, because if you tell me that everything is changing, you must be saying that existence is a formless event or a formless presence. Like the happening of this moment is actually formless, because our most basic sense of all of the apparent things in life are that they're changing. So life itself can't actually have a specific form. Now these forms are changing very slowly, but we know that if these were left out in a garden somewhere, they would slowly rust away. And it's the same with the buildings. If they were left without being maintained in any way on any regular basis, the glass would dry out, the putty would dry out, the plaster would dry out, the mortar between the bricks would dry out, and the whole thing would eventually, over time, turn to powder. And that powder would become so small, we would say that it's returned to the form of energy. So it's just a simple acknowledgement that life is this moving, shifting event. So in all the various religions and all of the non-dual teachings, they will eventually say that what actually exists is the Great Spirit. So I mean, what's a better way to refer to this moving, shifting, dancing event? It's a Great Spirit, or another group would say it's the unformed river of life, or the unformed ocean of life. The Taoists would say it's simply the way, and it's very much like the flowing of water. So they're simply pointing to what we experience right now, everything we see. Wang Po, the great Zen master, would say to people, Buddha nature, Buddha mind, this is everything you're seeing right now, and it has no form. So it's everything we see outside of us and everything we apparently see inside of us if we close our eyes and we experience what we would call the inside of us. We just find a moving, shifting event. If we have our eyes closed and we're experiencing the happening of this apparent body and the process that we are, you have this very obviously a moving, shifting event. Pulsation, vibration, warmth, coolness, tightness, looseness, thoughts coming and going, moods coming and going. So you have this moving, shifting, dancing event. Now, if we look out here, we have the weather changing, We can see in our physical appearance, if we look in the mirror, we see that our bodies are changing a little bit quicker than we would like them to change. The buildings change a little more slowly. The mountains change even more slowly, but they are all changing. So in Manitoba, we have a very old mountain range, and it used to be a very dynamic mountain range, but now it's just a bunch of big hills. So, you know, immediately our world of thought becomes suspect, because if I ask you what life is about, what the universe is about, you're going to describe form to me. You're going to give me a story about a whole bunch of forms, but you're also telling me that forms aren't the legitimate truth of existence. So there's a major contradiction there. And along with that, even in our storylines, we have a story that says, when we came out of the womb, we didn't have a story. And every one of us has the storyline that says, you know, our mothers taught us certain words, our father taught us certain words, our school system taught us certain words, and at a certain point, it all became very complex. We had these labels, we had these various descriptions of definite forms and less definite forms, like emotions and notions of awareness. And we join them all together and we end up with these major storylines. But if we look at those labels, you know, if I call this a chair, if I'm born in an English-speaking country, then my mother teaches me to call this a chair and to call this a nose and to call this an ear. If I'm born in France, I get a different set of labels. If I'm born in Russia, I get a different set of labels. And actually, the labels mean nothing. They only take on meaning when they point to an apparent form. So if we all agreed, instead of saying words like body and awareness and consciousness, we could just agree to use words like blix and flute and wassail. Now, you can sit around all afternoon having coffee with a friend, and you can talk about bodies and awareness and consciousness and feel like you really know something. And yet it's exactly the same as sitting around talking about blix and flute and wassail. It means nothing. They're meaningless sounds. I mean, they have some practical value. Like if I'm thirsty and I ask for a glass of water, then, you know, whatever this actually is that I call thirst and whatever this is that we actually call water, it's not thirst and it's not water, but it's helpful to ask for a glass of water and I can quench the thirst. But if we ask it to tell us what reality is, that's a whole other issue. Like, I can use a hammer as a useful tool, but I'm not going to ask the hammer what reality is. And I can use thought as a useful tool, but I'm not going to ask thought to tell me what reality is, because the whole process of thought is simply meaningless sound attached to forms that don't actually exist. So how are they possibly telling us anything about reality? Yes?
The forms do exist. They're shifting and they're moving all the time, but I can see you, I can see the glass, that's the convention we use for it.
Exactly. So obviously there's apparent form, and we're never going to get rid of that. There's apparent form, and some of these apparent forms are changing so slowly that they will seem very, very stable. Now, if we were watching smoke curling up from an incense stick, we would be able to see certain curls of smoke that look like the letter C. But in the exact moment that we identify that as the letter C, it's gone. So it essentially has no particular form. Now, with something like a mountain or a house, it's changing more slowly. And we obviously can't see the subtle changes that are taking place. But the whole world of science will tell us that there are subtle changes taking place, and that in metal columns, as time goes by, the columns actually get more dense down at the bottom than at the top, because there's a free-flowing waterfall of molecules coming down to the base of the column. So within this non-dual perspective, ultimately you end up having to say, like, if you're drawn to this, and everything I'm offering today is just for your consideration. I'm not saying you have to have a non-dual perspective. It's not the one true view of existence. It's just one of the mysterious expressions of existence. If you're drawn to it, great, it's very important. If you're not drawn to it, it's not important, it's not a big deal. But if you are drawn to it, like, ultimately you're going to have to acknowledge that we have no tool for talking about existence on the level of a reality. We don't have any way of saying what's happening here and now. And we don't really need to have an explanation for existence. Like right now, like here we are, existence is happening. If you don't have an explanation for it, it's no problem. It's happening anyway. It becomes just simply this great mysterious event. So getting back to your question, you know, if we sit down and we're making no effort to do anything at all, we still are going to have thoughts coming and going. We're going to have what we call moods coming and going. All of that is a natural expression of existence. Now, there's this funny situation with the world of thought because it seems to have so much importance. It seems to, like we're hoping that, you know, one of our most fundamental ways of trying to escape life is we want to understand it. So life is difficult, life has some tough situations. We would like it to get to a place where it wasn't so difficult and it doesn't have any tough situations. So one of the ways we would like to do that is to come up with a real explanation of existence, because if I could just understand it, I would be happy all the time. And the fact of the matter is, none of us understand what's going on here. You know, the world of physics, and I think around 1938, they gathered in Copenhagen, all the physicists, and they asked the question very directly, do any of our explanations have anything to do with reality? And the general consensus was, no, it has nothing to do with reality. It's just a working matrix for dealing with existence on a day-to-day basis. Now, so part of this is to see that the thoughts essentially aren't telling us any truth about life. Like, you need them on a day-to-day basis, or they will push themselves forward on a day-to-day basis, just because that's part of the expression of existence, and it's part of what we are in our functioning. However, you may begin to consider that that dance of thought is a totally automatic dance. Like, even if you pay no attention to it, it's going to dance around on its own anyway. And so a lot of the times in meditation practices, people sit down and they think the idea is to get rid of their world of thought. And it's not to get rid of the world of thought. It's simply to rest with the event that life is. Because it's simply an event. And this is where it gets very subtle, because people think the answer is going to come in a specific event, like a moment of golden light where there's all kinds of energy shifts and you move into some place where everything is just beatific from that point on, just one big blissful happening. That's not going to happen. Nobody gets that. There's always a moving, shifting, dancing event, and it's more to acknowledge that we're not doing it, we don't exist as anything apart from it, and we don't have to be concerned about it, because the whole thing is flowing like a river, or it's moving like the changing of the seasons. It's just presenting whatever it presents. And it doesn't matter how much understanding you have, it's going to present your apparent life with ups and downs, happiness and sadness, joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion. It's always going to be moving on to something else. You know, the apparent thoughts that you're having now, they're gone. They're already moving on to something else. The apparent mood you're in right now, it's gone. It's already moving on to something else. It may be shifting in a subtle way so that the change doesn't seem so obvious, but, you know, later on this afternoon, whatever mood you're in now, I mean, even if you're happy to see me now, later this afternoon, you might be thinking, oh, God, you know, tell this guy to shut up. It's like, so, you know, basically we're after about 4 different things. I mean, the Buddha was pretty clear about this. I didn't like the specific phrasing that he used in the last point, so I've changed it a bit. But basically, we feel that we're somebody separate from the movement of existence, and in order to be happy, we have to turn existence into something in particular. So we're running after 4 basic things. We're running after ongoing pleasure. So sights, sounds, touches, tastes, smells, and thoughts, we want them to be pleasant, and we don't want the unpleasant. The second thing we're generally running after is understanding. So again, we're feeling that if we could just understand existence, everything would be much better and I wouldn't suffer. If I could just understand why it was so difficult, then I wouldn't feel like I was suffering through this whole thing. The third thing we're basically looking for is a sense of self that never suffers a feeling of inadequacy or insecurity or loneliness. And the fourth thing we're looking for is we're looking for systems and techniques to accomplish the first 3. And basically the whole spiritual journey is one long journey of disappointment, because because you're going to find out that you can't have any of those things. You can't have endless pleasure. You can't have an understanding of existence. You can't have a sense of self. It doesn't matter whether you're thinking in terms of no self or big self or whatever self. You're just not going to have a sense of life where you're always feeling secure and confident and never lonely and never having your fearful moments. It doesn't matter who you are, like, you're going to have confusion at some point. Life will present situations that are confusing. And you're just never going to find a system or technique to control life in any kind of ultimate way. Now, this isn't to say that you should sit around doing nothing all the time. It's just, eventually this is pointing to the fact that this is an event. It's presenting itself, and it presents itself in whatever way it presents itself, and we're part of the expression. We're going to be presented in whatever way we're presented. And to acknowledge that very fully, we can simply relax, because the whole, as I said, the whole thing is moving in this, the same way that the seasons shift, that a river flows. It's just moving automatically. It's part of the expression of the universe. And in fact, the word universe means undivided turning. I mean, that literally, that's its translation. Uni meaning undivided, verse from the French root ver, to turn. So it's undivided turning. So to acknowledge this big, mysterious, undivided dance happening automatically, you begin to realize life will just play out in whatever way it plays out. It's a totally mysterious happening. In any particular moment, it's the only way it's going to present itself. It's not like we did something wrong and if only we had done it differently. It's like it's just presenting itself the way it's presenting itself. So, I mean, ultimately, this is where, I mean, this is ultimately what meditation is about. The bottom line meditation in all the major meditation traditions is you just sit down and do absolutely nothing. You sit here, you do absolutely nothing, and you know, maybe you discuss a bit that thought itself is just a mysterious presentation, a mysterious dance, moving and shifting. And so you sit here and the heart's beating and the moods are shifting and the thoughts are coming and going, and there's pulsation and vibration and warmth and coolness, and there's pulsations, and there's a little twinge here and a little shift there, and then it gets really painful after a certain amount of time, and you're just kind of dancing in your seat, and it's like it's all just happening. And that's all you have to acknowledge. Like once in a while when Jiddu Krishnamurti would really get down to saying what it was all about, he would say that it was, you know, and he very rarely did. So, rare occasion. He would say, just acknowledge the movement. That you don't have to analyze it. You can't analyze it. There's no way of explaining what it is. You can't dissect it conceptually because all of that's just fantasy. All you have to do is acknowledge the event. And basically that's what they all say. Like Nisargadatta Maharaj, shortly before he died, I mean, there's a last little book, a transcript of his teachings. It's called Consciousness and the Absolute. And so he explains in there how through most of his teaching years, he thought he was something called consciousness. And he realized closer to the end of his life, he realized that no, that's just some weird idea, that he wasn't conscious at all. And so he would say there's just this dynamic function. So they point to this unexplainable movement. So in the Christian terminology, for the ones who are really approaching Christianity in this way, they will say God is a verb, not a noun. Just meaning God is this eventing. It's not something that's separate from the eventing. Within the Bible, you've got all these really wonderful expressions. So somebody asks God, who are you? And God says, I am the I am. So I am the amness, the isness of this moment. And then later on it says God is spirit. So once again, the amness, the isness is one moving, shifting, dancing event. And it is in God that we live and move and have our being. And within the last few paragraphs of the Bible, in the book of Revelations, it says, you know, the John that wrote the book of Revelations, it's not the John that wrote the Gospel of John, but the John who wrote the book of Revelations eventually says, an angel of God revealed to me the river that flows down the center of the city of God, and the mark of man is removed. So again, there's this reference to this river, this flowing, and Christ just stated it outright. The wind blows wherever it blows. You can't know where it's coming from, and you can't know where it's going to. And that's the non-dual acknowledgement. All of this is going to do whatever it's going to do. So in the resting with the moment, it's not so much getting rid of the thought, but realizing thought is very limited in what it's offering to us. And we become more comfortable acknowledging thought as just this mysterious happening. We don't even have to call it thought. And even with the strongest thought, like in this moment, you have this feeling of what we would call pressure, there where the body touches the chair. Now, we don't have to call it pressure. And it makes itself obvious. What we call pressure is a happening that isn't a thought. And it's just as strong as any thought. So in a meditation session, what you would call a meditation session, I don't really care for that word. You know, these days I'm using acknowledging the moment, but acknowledging the happening of the moment. But it's really permission to simply acknowledge the full event of this moment. Like right now, you have what you call seeing, hearing, touching, all the tactile sensations, tasting, smelling, and thinking. So thinking is about this much of it, and we're always focused on this much of it instead of the full event. So this is the fragmentation. We're always pulling the fullness of life down into this small, divided world. And it's a world of conflict, because in the world of apparent form, you know, I'd say, this is a piece of paper, and this is a glass of water. Now, in order to get the sense that this is somehow different to this, we have to focus on this apparent form and this apparent form, and then we put them in opposition to each other. So the world of thought is always opposition. And most of the time, when we're lost in thought, it doesn't seem like a big conflict. But if you keep focused on thought and you keep believing the stories that it's telling, and when you believe the stories that it's telling, you then, like your hold on the world of thought increases, because you really think you're figuring something out, you really think you're understanding something. But the longer you stay in it, the more there's a feeling of conflict, because it is always in opposition. And eventually you start looking at somebody else and saying, yeah, they're better than I am. You know, I'm not quite as accomplished as that person. So it's very odd that human beings, you know, if we walk into any amazing forest anywhere, it could be a tropical forest, it could be a West Coast temperate forest, we walk into those forests and we're just amazed at all of the expressions of nature. The little insects, all of the various plant life, the mighty trees, everything is just an amazing expression of nature. We're not going to the small trees, the short trees, and saying, if you had tried a little harder, you could have been this mighty cedar. And we don't go up to the beetle and say, you know, if you'd found just the right spiritual practice, you could have been a butterfly. It makes no sense. Yet we go home and look in the bathroom mirror, and it's like, you're not okay. There's something wrong with you. Like, why don't we see ourselves as one of the wild, exotic expressions of existence? Like, what is the difference? The difference is, see here I start out saying I don't like giving general talks, and then I get then the whole thing just takes off. But yeah, it's anyway, I don't know if anybody else has any questions or anything they're wanting to say to this.
Yeah, I have a thought, because I think in spiritual circles, thought does get bad press.
Yes.
But it seems to me thought on the individual level is incredibly useful.
Yes.
It's like a hammer is very useful, as you say.
Yes.
But you don't ask it to tell the truth.
Right.
Nor do you use a hammer to try and fix a computer.
Exactly.
You know, if you use a hammer for what it's for, it's great. And it seems to me that thought is exactly the same.
Yes.
The thought, what's the use of the paper, what's the use of the glass of water, are different things. And if I'm clear that that's what thought is good at,
Yes.
then it's not a problem. It's really useful.
Exactly. And this is the thing, like a lot of times non-dual presenters will, they'll kind of avoid considering thought. And people sometimes think they're trying to sweep aside our daily life and sweep aside the world of thought, sweep aside the various storylines that we have. I know in my case, I was, early on, I was focusing mainly on the fact that this is an event which takes care of itself. And I thought, well, that's pretty obvious. So, I mean, it'll be pretty obvious to everyone else, but it isn't quite obvious to everyone else. So I'm now having to, or wanting to point out that, to talk about the formless happening that's just happening on its own, you're also talking about this world of apparent form. The world of apparent form and the world of stories is the formless event expressing itself. And not only do you have to have thought in living your life, you can't avoid it. You are being expressed with thoughts. You are being expressed with this apparent perception of form. And there's no way around it. That's all the dance of this larger, mysterious, formless expression of existence. And ultimately in that, ultimately in that, it has to be an acknowledgement of your unique adventure, because within the world of apparent form, another thing we end up having to acknowledge is that each and every form is unique. Like, they tell us you can't find any two snowflakes that are identical. I mean, have you ever considered how many snowflakes have existed in existence? And no two of them can be identical. It's one of the, it's a very simple water molecule, but no two of them are identical. And we even have this weird idea that somehow it's somewhat symmetrical, that it's somewhat circular and it's geometric and it's got these beautiful patterns, but that's not true. I mean, it's just a big scam. It's like, again, we all want to live in Disneyland. Everything has to be pretty. In fact, most snowflakes look like distorted pieces of metal. Like when they're blowing up, the actual shape of them is just some bizarre piece of metal that arises with sharp barbs and all kinds of a distorted look to them. But the basic thing I'm pointing to here is that within the world of form, apparent form, each of us is unique. Now, I used to just leave it as each of us is unique, and I thought, well, people will get the message from that, but they don't. So here it is. You have to be different from absolutely every other person on the face of the earth. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you're sitting here listening to me thinking, oh, he's got a pretty good view of life, and he seems pretty easygoing about it, this realization must have made him this way. Just drop that thought now, because it's like, you can't have my exact sense of existence. The world doesn't need, or existence doesn't need another me. The demand is you. It needs each and every one of you. You're the legitimate expression of existence, just as you are, in each and every moment. And that's the ultimate expression of non-duality. Like it's, again, like I'm really puzzled by, people have been going to various presenters for like 20 years and they walk away feeling less adequate than when they went to the teacher. Like, this is ridiculous. I mean, the ultimate message in non-duality is that there's a big event doing what it does, and each and every apparent form that's expressed is a legitimate expression of this great mysterious happening. But it's a demand. I mean, if you're drawn to this, the demand is that you will have to be the wild, exotic expression that you are. And I know a lot of people, they hear these words and they think, well, it'd probably be pretty difficult for me to look in the bathroom mirror and think I'm a wild, exotic expression, but you are, in your uniqueness. You are. In the same way that you go to that tropical forest and you admire all of the exotic birds and all of the exotic bugs, and or you stand out under a night sky in the desert somewhere and it's just, endless stars forever, and it's just this massive happening that you can't really comprehend, and you're not standing there saying, yeah, that constellation would have looked a bit better over near, like near Pleiades. It would have really worked, but hasn't quite worked. So you don't do that. And again, we go home, we look in the bathroom mirror and say, what's wrong with me? Like, there must be something wrong with me. Like, again, what's the difference? It's like, most of us have the feeling that everything in existence is the expression of nature or the expression of the universe. So you don't have the impression that a squirrel is deciding its career as a squirrel. You don't have the feeling that a rock is rocking incorrectly. We have the feeling that absolutely everything in existence is an expression of nature, an expression of the universe, an expression of the laws of the universe. Everything except one thing, human beings. We run the universe. You know, I can sit down and have a conversation with any one of you and I'll ask you, you know, have you created your body? No. Have you created your brain? No. Right now, are you making them function? Like, are you somehow overseeing the beating of the heart or the synaptic firing of all the cells in your brain? No. Have you created your needs? No. Have you created your interests? Well, no, I like this and I don't like that. And have you created your concerns? No. Have you created your abilities? No, I can do this, but I have great difficulty doing this. Have you created your lack of abilities? No. But I am in charge. I am really directing myself through life. I'm the one in charge. And we have this general sense of existence. And so that's the difference. You know, we can go to the tropical forest, and that's an amazing expression of nature. Each and every expression is to be honored in some way, even if we don't like it, even if it's dangerous. Like, this doesn't make us stupid. It's like if there's a poisonous snake, we all know, avoid the poisonous snake. It's not like, oh, I love existence, and I'll just let this snake bite me a million times. Like, it's totally ridiculous. But what's the difference? The difference is we think we're somehow in charge. And because we think we're somehow in charge, we think we're responsible for whatever expression we are. So we look in the mirror, we go through our life, and there's certain things we do well, and we say, wow, you know, I'm really great. I can do this so well. I should really get a certain amount of credit for this. And then we're unhappy that we don't get the credit for it. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't do so well, and then it's just like, oh, I'm the worst thing that ever lived, and I'll never be worth anything at all, just because we think we're in charge. You know, and it's amazing how much human beings want to hang on to this notion. Like the scientists right now, with all the neurological explorations that they're doing, they're coming up with these wild experiments. Like, they have one experiment where they tell you to hold a button in each hand, and then they tell you within a certain period of time, press one of the buttons, and just before you're going to press that button, tell us you've decided to press the button and press it. So they find out, you know, they wire your brain up to monitor all of the activities in the brain, and what they discover is 7 seconds before you even know you're going to make a decision, they know you're going to make a decision, and they know what decision you're going to make. Before you even know you're going to make a decision. So now people are saying, well, that makes it very difficult to feel like we're actually in charge. Like somehow the brain is functioning on its own before we're even conscious that we're going to make a decision. It's already doing everything that's involved with the activity that we're thinking we're going to decide to do. So now the scientists are saying, well, okay, so maybe we don't have free will in that way, but we do have the freedom to stop the action somehow. Like, they're really wanting to hang on to this notion of being in charge, because if they don't, they think it means determinism, fate. But it doesn't really mean that. It means that within the world of storylines, but none of the storylines apply. So people will often have the impression that, you know, they hear a non-dual presenter, they think they're saying there is no free will. But they're not saying that. They're saying there is no free will and there is no fate. These descriptions don't apply to what's going on here. Flat out, they don't apply. So that was the Buddha's ultimate statement. Descriptions do not apply. So he called himself the Tathagata, and it just means one who is to thusness come, or one who is to thusness gone, meaning he's come to the thusness of existence, the isness, the suchness of existence. And he said, one who is to thusness come no longer describes existence in terms of physical forms, feelings, perceptions, mental activities, or states of consciousness. Descriptions do not apply. So all of, these 5 basic groupings of description, physical form, feelings, perceptions, mental activities, states of consciousness, these basically house all of our descriptions of life. And he said, he just stated outright, none of them really apply. Now, it didn't mean that he never had an apparent thought. It just means that when the thoughts came and went, he knew it was just some strange happening. Like, the only reason we call them thought is somebody told us to call them thought. There's just some strange dance of something, some apparent thing, but there's no way of saying what it is. So, again, with resting, gaining some freedom from that thought, it's coming to see the limitation of thought and really coming to acknowledge that what's more fascinating is this larger dance. Like, what's that? I know there's a focus in non-dual presentations, a focus on no self. So that's great. I mean, you can run around saying there's no self, but my question is, so okay, there's no self, so what is there? Like, and with this no self business, it's always this focus on thought. There is no self, there is no self, and ideas about what it's going to mean to be no self. So this is more, that's kind of a beginner thing. It's like, because there's a lot more to be acknowledged, and basically, if there is no self, what is there? Like Ramana Maharshi had this self-inquiry, like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Basically, you ask the question long enough so that you stop giving a conceptual answer. Because right now, even if you don't have any thought, you feel like something's happening right now. So again, the whole process that you think you are is happening right now, and you're not making it happen. You don't have to call it anything, and it still happens. You don't have to sit there thinking there's an awareness of the moment. There's just this happening, and it's making itself obvious. The whole notion of an awareness of the moment is just a total fantasy. You don't have to call it anything, and it presents itself. And not only will it present itself, it's going to present the next thought that you need in whatever situation you apparently need thought. So ultimately, with this acknowledgement of no self, if you have the feeling that there isn't any self separate from the happening of existence, then what is it to focus on? Like, ultimately, there just has to be the happening of this moment, doing what it does. And that's where we hear about how these realizations might bring some feeling of bliss. And the feeling is, or the impression is, that it's going to create some situation where we're always feeling happy, that everything is just a golden moment, a golden glowing moment. But that has nothing to do with this so-called awakening. I mean, even even the story of awakening is just a total fantasy. Like, there's just this happening, doing what it does. No one can say what it is. And to acknowledge that it's just happening on its own, that everything we apparently are is being presented as an expression of this happening, then you can rest. Ultimately, what happens is you're chasing all of these things, and Ajahn Chah used to say, you're chasing a turtle with a mustache. They don't exist. So, and eventually you find out what you're chasing doesn't exist, and then what you're left with is this, which is even more interesting, because this happens by itself. And it's just expressing whatever it expresses, and it expresses it's like the wildest ride in the universe. And each one of us gets a unique apparent journey in this. Each one of us is a unique expression in this. We might be very similar to another human being, but we can't be exactly the same. So, now, I mean, they're very clear that no two people have the same pulse rate, no two people have the same skin composition. No two people walk in the same way. So they're thinking in the future they'll just have a camera sitting at the borders. And as you walk up to the camera will identify you for who you are. And if you say you are, if you say the same name that the camera is saying, then they just wave you through, no problem. And even if you're injured in some major way, you still end up moving in such a similar fashion to what the camera had originally recorded, that they still know it's you. So each of us is unique, and yet somehow we get within these spiritual traditions and it's, oh, an ideal human being, you know, what we're all supposed to be is this. And then they rattle off a list of characteristics that nobody ever matched. You know, I don't know if the Buddha ever matched that. They have all these ideas about these famous masters, and you know, they think they were living in endless bliss, but I don't think when Christ was being nailed to the cross, he was thinking, I'm having a really great time here. Like, this is, it just doesn't make any sense. And there's enough recorded about the Buddha that he had terrible back pain. He sometimes would have to give up a teaching in the middle of it because his back hurt so much. And he would lie down behind the teaching seat and have another monk finish the teaching because life just hurt too much. He just couldn't finish the teaching. You know, there's a story about him losing his two closest disciples, and he gathered all the other monks in that area together, and he just said, this assembly is empty for me now. Like, it's great that I'm not weeping and wailing about it, but for me, this whole assembly is now empty. Because they were his two closest companions, the ones that he felt matched his sense of things. And he lost them, like they were a lot younger than he was, and he lost them. And he died of food poisoning. You know, he had weeks and weeks of vomiting and diarrhea. I don't think it was a blissful event. He had to suffer through famine, eating horse bran. Like, I don't know exactly what horse bran is, but it doesn't, it sounds like you need a lot of water to get it down. Like, so it's, you know, it's not that we're going to end up with a perfect life or endless bliss or never suffer. It's we begin to acknowledge this amazingly mysterious happening that nobody can comprehend in any way whatsoever. And yeah, it may seem a terrible thing that you're not getting exactly what Brad Pitt is getting, or exactly what Johnny Depp is getting, or exactly what Angelina Jolie is getting. Great. Yeah, it's tough luck, but the thing is, what you are getting contains so many wonderful things. Like, each and every one of us has moments of joy. Each and every one of us has a certain capacity to love. We have these wonderful things being presented along with all the terrible things. And then, you know, if you're really drawn to this, it is somewhat magical in a way, because it's all just happening on its own. And we're expressions of this event. So, you know, you end up with people expressing this in phrases like, there is just this magical parade of passing appearances. So one moment you're happy, you enjoy it, but you don't try to hang on to it because you can't hang on to it. You just really enjoy it. And then that fades and it moves into unhappiness for a while, and you can't get rid of that, so you're going to have to endure it in whatever way you have to endure it. I mean, each of us has a different sensibility. Each of us has a different sense of what's appropriate to be doing in that situation. So just before I left Canada, they were doing a special on CBC News on the radio on depression. And they were pointing out that there isn't any blanket treatment for depression. Each and every apparent person who's feeling depression is a unique situation. And you have to kind of fiddle around a bit and explore a bit to find what essentially will work for that unique situation. And so it is with all of us. It seems like we're kind of feeling life out and we never really know where it's going. But along the way, it's presenting this wide mixture of things, wonderful things, terrible things, and all of it just this moving, shifting, mysterious dance. So, you know, people call it the Great Spirit, people call it the river of life, people call it the unformed ocean of existence, the Tao, the way. There's just the way it's expressing itself. There is only the way. So the Taoist masters just wouldn't be concerned. Like, there's just the way it's expressing itself. There's just the way it's expressing me. There's no way of saying anything about it. Ultimately, we don't cause it to happen. We don't influence it in any way. Everything we are is an expression of this dance, of this event. Like Einstein, when he was 17, he read Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer's major statement, der Mensch kann tun, was will, kann aber nicht wollen, was will, which basically means you can do whatever you will, you just can't will what you're going to will. And a looser translation, which is just as correct, You can do what you want to do, but you can't create your wants. And Einstein read that and just realized, yeah, that makes sense. I'm an expression of the universe. I don't have anything to do with my life. Everything is an expression of the universe. So he would, in his free time, he would go around to groups like the Spinoza Association in North America, and he would say that we bear no more responsibility for our life than tomato plants or stars or, rocks. We're all an expression of existence. Again, this is just from this non-dual perspective. It's not that anybody has to have a non-dual perspective. If you're drawn to it, it will somehow make sense, and it will be important. If you're not drawn to it, that's fine. I mean, if you're more interested in making money with IBM or Microsoft, that's just as legitimate an expression of whatever this is as anything else. All right, it seems I've kind of lost some steam here, so I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions.
Yeah, that comes back, it sounds very fatalistic again. Fatalistic, and have you got free choice?
Yeah, because within the storyline, if you're focusing on the storyline, it seems like there's a me who's now being pushed around by a cold, impersonal personal existence. And this is why the non-dual expression is saying none of the descriptions apply. So it's saying what there is this, just this happening. There's no way of saying what it is, and it's moving to its own free expression, absolute freedom. It's just doing what it does, because there's nothing that can stop it from doing what it does. And it's not expressing something separate from it. We don't exist as something being pushed around by nature. We're the dance of nature. It's not that we exist as, the universe is pushing us around. We are an expression of the universe. There just is this unformed, unexplainable happening presenting itself. So the non-dual, like a non-dual expression, a non-dual presentation is really simply an exploration of life. Like I can sit here and you can tell me that you're directing your life, and I'll just, again, I'll ask you, have you created your brain? Have you created your body? Are you making them function right now? Are you, like the synaptic firing of the cells of your brain that are giving rise to the next thought that you're having, are you creating that synaptic firing of the cells in your brain? We don't even know there's synaptic firing in the cells of our brain, other than scientists tell us that. Have we created our basic needs? Like you need to go to the toilet every day. Were you in the womb at some point thinking, oh, I'm going to have a lot of free time, like what should I do? Like, it'd be great if I could go to the toilet every day a number of times and have that get more difficult as I get older. It's like, yeah, that's a great decision. If you love art and somebody says, well, you're never going to make much money of that, you really should get into technology, but if you love art, you love art. You're not going to snap your fingers and love technology. So your basic needs, your interests, your concerns, like people are concerned about a lot of different things. Each and every one of you is in a specific situation in life where you have certain concerns. Now some of them are going to be similar to other people, but some of them are going to be very, very different. They have to be different from everyone else that's being expressed. Have you created your abilities? Like you have talents. Each and every one of you has talents at certain things. And there are other things you don't have talents with. It's like, have you created your lack of abilities? You can't just decide to create your abilities or your lack of abilities. All of that's simply given. And yet we somehow have the feeling that, we function on these things. It's our basic needs and our interests that are driving us through life. But we don't create those. As Schopenhauer said, you can do what you want to do, but you don't create your wants. And so, all of us already know this. It's just that we very seldom sit down and actually consider what it would really mean. So, I've already spoken to you about, we all acknowledge that everything is changing. And I've pointed out that that must mean existence is a totally unformed happening, a totally formless event. But even though I've pointed that all out, for most of you, if I say, what's happening in this room, you're going to tell me there's a bunch of people sitting in a room. And that's an absolute lie. There's no way of saying what's happening right now. Like whatever this is, I don't know what this is. It just happens the way it happens. It's just, you know, apparently they put me in a room filled with apparent people that have an apparent interest in apparent non-duality. I don't know whether any of that's true. Like I don't have the feeling any of that's true. And this happens. And sometimes it's just sound. You know, a certain portion of the time it seems like there's a comprehension of what's being said. But then at other moments it's just, I don't know what it is. It's just this happening the way it happens. And then everybody out there kind of nods or shakes their head or just looks glum. And I don't know what any of it is. It just happens the way it happens. And no non-dual presenter will know what's happening. There isn't, like if anyone has what's classically known, or if anyone is expressed as what's classically known as a non-dual sensibility, they're not going to have an understanding of existence. It doesn't matter how many stories they give you, they cannot believe that those stories are the truth. That's just flat out one of the marks of a non-dual sensibility. So all of this was laid out like 3,000 years ago. They've got recorded teachings of a non-dual sensibility, what they now call a non-dual sensibility. And it just, you know, the basics of it are, there's just this happening, there's no way of saying what it is, it's just doing what it does, and we don't exist as anything separate from the presentation. There is just the Great Spirit. In all of these religions, they end up having these major statements. There is only God. There is only the Great Spirit. There is only the way. There is only the unformed ocean of existence. It doesn't matter what it appears to be. There is only this great, unformed, unexplainable happening. Now, again, this is just for your consideration, because it's not saying that everyone is going to be expressed, every apparent person is going to be expressed with a non-dual sensibility. It's some apparent people are expressed with this sensibility, the rest aren't. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. And it's not that one is the right expression and the other is the wrong expression. All of it is the appropriate expression of whatever this is. It's the only expression it can be. It used to be that I would go through life kind of identifying all those unpleasant situations, and things like loneliness, things like confusion, and then I would try to solve it. I would try to, figure out, well, what's causing that? If I could just find the basic cause of it, then, this loneliness and this confusion would melt away. But at a certain point, it became more obvious that I don't even know what this is. Like, it's just what I would call an unpleasant feeling. And no matter how I managed to apparently move my life, it always ended up having these unpleasant feelings. So one I might label loneliness, another I might label confusion, another I might label fear. And now there's no real labeling of anything. I mean, the labels come, but what's more obvious is it's all on automatic. There's just this dance of existence, and sometimes it feels what we would call pleasant, and sometimes it feels unpleasant, but it doesn't have any form. So if you're apparently feeling lonely, just wait. I mean, in a day or two or a week, it's going to start feeling up. And then you start thinking, oh yeah, no, I've really figured it out. It's going to feel great. And then just wait. It's not going to feel that way in a while. So, one morning you wake up and everything's so clear and it's like, boy, I've really figured it all out now. And then a week later, it's just like, oh, I'm so confused. Like, I better go check all those notebooks where I wrote down all the wisdom teachings, and and you look at them and you're thinking, why did I write that one down? Like, that's really strange. Like, and we all, many of us have done that in the past, where we're just collecting all of these, that's a major insight. I need to write that down. And then you look at it the next morning, it says the grass is green. It's like, that must have been the wine, because this is no longer as amazing. And so, I had a stack of quotations in my closet, and I put them in the closet, and I'd never look at them again. Like, it's because we're always looking for some product of the stream. We're always looking for some product of the great mysterious dance, instead of acknowledging the dance. It's a dance. Like, you don't go to a dance with a chart. You know, the dance starts at 7, and, you know, at 7 o'clock and 1 second, let's say my left foot's going to be here, and I'll put my right foot here, and you plan that all out. You just go to the dance, you listen to the music, and there's a response. It's just the flow of life itself. So people, you know, people sometimes ask, like, what am I supposed to do then? Like, how am I supposed to live life? I don't know, you're a totally unique expression. Like, what makes sense to you? Be what you are. Do what makes sense. Go with whatever makes sense, because you can't really do anything else. Like, I could tell you all kinds of things that I do, but they won't be appropriate for you. I mean, for some they might be appropriate, but they won't be totally appropriate. And at some point you will be drawn to your own intuition. I mean, the whole thing about, you know, things like meditation situations, withdrawing yourself from society and resting in quiet, it's really just to acknowledge the unique event that you are. You know, something makes sense to you in life. If you step away from all the other voices, everyone else telling you what you're supposed to be, and you just start acknowledging, what is it I value in life? Like, people are looking for the meaning to life, and it's like, they're looking for some weird conceptual thing, and it's like, there is no conceptual meaning to life. It's just a totally mysterious dance doing what it does. But the real meaning to your life is you love certain things. There are certain things that are of great interest to you. There are other things that are of no meaning, no interest to you and have no meaning to you. Things you don't really care for. That's fine. Acknowledge the things that you do love. Just, I mean, we will ultimately follow that, or have to follow that, because try as we might to follow all the other things, it's just not going to work. Once we start acknowledging this, we're basically going to have to live with whatever life presents. And then people start getting concerned, well, if I'm just living with whatever life presents, like what's going to happen is somebody's going to come along and do terrible things to me, and I'm just going to sit there and say, it's okay. It's an expression of life, it's fine, but that's not what's going to happen. If somebody comes along and starts rubbing you the wrong way, you're going to want to punch them in the face. That's the natural expression of life. Like, you'll be agitated with them. The whole movement to do anything in life is also the expression of this dance. So if you have an urge for wisdom, like people say it's all about wisdom and compassion. No, it isn't. Only certain people have an interest in wisdom and compassion. I don't have any particular interest in wisdom and compassion. I'm the expression I am. I don't have to be some other expression. You know, people think that humankind is moving itself through the world through some kind of wisdom. Yet in the last couple of years, you know, science was explaining to everybody on the face of the planet that to travel by air, to travel by jet, was absolutely the worst thing that we could do for this situation of global warming. And what happened? Air travel went up. So that's how much wisdom we have. That's how much wisdom we'll probably be exhibiting through most of our short existence. All of it is this mysterious dance expressing itself in whatever way it expresses itself. There are some wonderful things that it expresses. There are some terrible things that it seems to express. The whole thing is the dance. If you want only the good things, we're always, you know, any of us that want only those joyous golden moments and we're wanting to get rid of the dark moments, the confusing moments, we'll just be frustrated. In India, they had really great symbols for this. They had figures like Mother Kali. You know, she's dark, she's mysterious, she's powerful, she's got fangs, she's giving birth, this wonderfully creative event, and then she's eating her children alive. That's the expression of life. This whole thing where, like, I don't know what happened in the technological world. This notion of everything's going to be a Disney ending is just really odd. Like, it's like, in North America, we have this show called Barney. It's about a big purple dinosaur, and eventually Barney gets all the children to join hands, and they sing the same song, and it's joyous, and it's like, this is not life. This is not a good preparation for life. Life is a dynamic, flowing, shifting, dancing, all-powerful happening, and it's expressing itself in all these various ways. It's not that it's expressing opposites and we're trying to get rid of one of them and hang on to the other. It's all of these things are the various faces of whatever the various apparent phases of whatever this is. So in all of these various traditions, they end up saying, there is only, in one they'll say, there is only God. That's all there is, God. And God is the totally unexplainable happening of this moment. There isn't anything apart from it. The whole, yes, there are apparent forms, but even our own supposed intellectual reasoning will tell us that that can't be the legitimate form of existence. So it's like a mirage. Like we see water in a mirage, and when we first see it, we believe there's water there. But if we explore a mirage, we find out there isn't any water there, but we still see water. And so it is with life. We start out thinking there are apparent forms. We try to hang on to these forms. It doesn't matter to us whether we're trying to hang on to a mountain, but we want to hang on to that nice, pleasant feeling we had with a certain apparent person. Or we want to hang on to that brilliant little insight, that form that we call a thought, that brilliant little insight, and we're going to hang on to it, and that's going to keep us happy. And we keep trying to hang on to those things, and what happens? We lose them because life doesn't have a form. It's never had a form. It never will have a form. So if you're looking for some moment of enlightenment, some big insight that's going to keep you always happy, it isn't going to happen. With this non-dual sensibility, it may become obvious that there is only this dance, and it will dance in whatever way it's going to dance. And it becomes obvious that we're not making it happen. And so the things that we need in life will be presented. The things that we want in life, those wants will be presented. The interests that we're going to apparently have, it's not that we really have these things. We are this particular arrangement of needs, interests, concerns, abilities, and lack of abilities. It's just the expression of existence, because this great unformed happening always expresses itself in apparent forms, and each and every apparent form is unique.
I just feel a bit of conflict in myself about this free will idea, and I'm just thinking, is the pursuit, if you will, of say trying to adopt a non-dual sensibility, is that pursuit in a way? For me, it feels like it's an exercise in how to become happier.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of books out, self-help books, and I read one of bits recently called The How-To of Happiness.
Right.
And there's loads and loads of books. And I remember what struck me was this pie chart of the researcher said 50% is your set level that you're born with, 10% of your happiness is your outside circumstances, whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you're really rich or whatever, and 40% is flexible. In other words, I feel like there's a conflict from what you're saying and with this idea that you could become more happy within this 40% of exercises. And the book then goes on to say what you could do, help people do this, exercise, all these sorts of things to become more happy.
Right.
And from what I can see, what you're saying so far is that Buddhism says that the suffering that you have is because of this grasping.
Mm-hmm.
As humanity, all want to become more happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, do these things, and then you will become more happy. But what you're saying is that even if you do those things, you might not become happy.
Mm-hmm.
And that I just feel, I can feel this conflict that part of me just doesn't want to do anything. I don't really want to, sometimes, quite a lot of the time, I don't want to make any art, I
Mm-hmm.
just want to sit in my tent and just do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to do these things to become more happy, to communicate and to see where I'm coming from, this kind of doing of happiness.
Yes, and so when people hear this particular perspective, they're thinking I'm sweeping away all of that, but I'm not. I'm embracing all of that in a larger acknowledgement, so that if you have an urge to be happy, and you have an urge to approach that pursuit of happiness in a certain way, none of that is your doing. It's the expression of this larger event. So I'm saying you can't sweep aside your particular sensibility of life. You can just acknowledge that all of it is the expression of something bigger than you, and you will have to follow or yeah, I mean, I don't like the word follow, but you will have to follow the only sensibilities that you have. And if you look at those particular techniques that you're interested in, you have to acknowledge too that not everybody is interested in that. That there are some people who will read those books and just say, what a lot of bollocks, like, forget this, I'm not interested in this. And then of all the people who practice those techniques, how many are endlessly happy? They're happier leading that life than any other life, and that isn't their doing. The fact that they're drawn to that, to live that way, still makes them feel happier, but they didn't create the urge to go to those traditions. They don't create the interest in those traditions. So again, it's not trying to disavow anything in existence. It's not trying to sweep away anything in existence. It's just taking a look at the bigger picture. I mean, again, like, everyone's sense of existence is different. So, like, I don't usually have a focus on things like cause and effect. Like, that just isn't presented in my, you know, how I'm presented.
Well,
but yeah,
internal economy, you mean?
Yeah, in the general consideration of things, like, it just seems I'm left with just a totally unexplainable happening, just happening the way it happens. And so it always ends up that somehow the root of, like, the belief in the explanations just has gone away. And so there's no real inclination to define life in any way, and no belief that any of the definitions have any real truth to them. So it's just like, immediately, it doesn't matter what anybody says about existence. It's fine, we can chat, we can have fun with them, we can joke around, but ultimately I just have no sense of what any of this is. It just happens the way it happens.
And the fact that you're considered to be such and such, you're in no shape, sense or form were the doer in allowing that to happen at all.
No, and I mean, this is the other great thing, is like, if you think this so-called awakening leaves you feeling that you're an awakened being, that's totally absurd. It's totally ridiculous. The acknowledgement is, there's this, there's no way of saying what it is, it just does what it does, and we're not anything apart from the happening. You don't end up thinking, oh, there are enlightened beings and there are ignorant beings, and, you know, one person's a better expression of existence than another. That's not the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is, there's no way of saying what any of this is. So if somebody's sitting around thinking they're an enlightened being, that's not a non-dual sensibility. It doesn't matter what else they're saying. If they're sitting around thinking that there's something that can be described in any accurate way, that is not a non-dual sensibility.
Because recently in London, there was a big meeting called, and all awakened people were invited, all enlightened people were invited. But the person who called the meeting, everyone who came, they were immediately disqualified because they responded to that call.
See, it's ridiculous. Like life is this incredible zoo of marvelous expressions, and then we sit around saying, well, that one's not right, and this one doesn't measure up, and it's like, most of the time it's pointed at us. Somebody else is saying, you're not quite right, and you don't measure up, and it's like, it's totally absurd. It's like, again, this is just my perspective, and I just offer it for your consideration. Like, I don't ask anybody else to see life in this way, but to me it's just totally absurd. Like, it's just, we marvel at all of these different expressions of existence and then end up feeling that somehow we're absolutely wrong, we're terrible, you know, we just haven't succeeded where we should have succeeded, we're not what a human being should be. But absolutely every human being is exactly what a human being should be, because none of it is the doing of human beings. It's just a totally mysterious happening doing what it does. Like, it's, you know, all those people sitting in judgment of other people, that's also the legitimate expression of existence. And all those people who believe that non-dual sensibility is going to lead to some endless state of bliss, that's also the legitimate state of existence, the legitimate expression of existence. It's all the legitimate expression of existence. You don't ever have to worry about being the right expression or the wrong expression. Just acknowledge the expression you are, and the joyful things that you're presented as, the joyful interests that you have, and just consider, you know, maybe having a little more of that as part of your life instead of listening to somebody else telling you you should be something else. Yeah.
I just want,
Sorry. No, carry
I
on.
wondered if you could use another word for the sensibilities. I'm struggling with non-dual sensibilities. Can you?
Okay, like perspective, would that?
Perspective,
Okay, perspective would work. So now you were...
When you were talking about, you know, people seeking bliss and that sort of thing, and that seems to be their goal in spiritual seeking or whatever it is. What about if a sort of sensibility starts to express itself in you, or this non-dual thing maybe? What about those bliss? If you do have these, have what's so-called, you know, kind of powerful experiences,
Right.
that are kind of, you know, satisfying in themselves, or they're powerful.
Yes.
You know, almost drug-like, or you know, very, very extreme experiences. Like as you were speaking a bit more at the beginning when you were talking about your early
Right.
meditation experiences. And that sort of thing. It seems to me is a bit that you get quite caught up in that, not necessarily seeking that bliss stuff, but just you're in it. So you sort of, you know, like, a bit like somebody addicted to something. When you're addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever, your body wants it in a way. Do you know what I mean? It's as if it's like that. And when you're caught up in, if you're caught up in that sort of thing, I think you on your website you talked about this a bit quite recently with people writing in.
Yes.
And you were talking about it as a sort of storm, or
Yeah.
people are sort of in this thing. And bliss and things like that, or very extreme experiences, or very clear experiences, and then they go away, and seem to be part of it.
Yes.
Have you got
What-
anything to say to that?
Just that the difficulty is, you know, believing that, you know, when that bliss state comes, it's going to stay. That's really the only difficulty, because, you know, we eat a meal and we don't expect that that's going to satiate our hunger forever. So we know we're going to have to eat another meal.
Sure.
But, you know, we start a new relationship and we start thinking, this is the one, this is the person who's going to keep me from ever feeling lonely again. And then there's trouble, because that doesn't happen. Or we have one of these meditative experiences that, you know, they occur for certain people on these long retreat situations, and those are wonderful. But I know people who've been chasing those for 30 years, and they're still wondering, like, why can't I get life to be one endless bliss experience? And they're suffering tremendously.
Yes.
So it's just, the Buddha never said, you know, pleasant experiences were bad, or that desire was even bad. He just said it's the desire that arises when you're believing that those pleasant experiences are going to completely satisfy you once and for all.
I understand that. I'm kind of saying, what about when it seems as if it's just rolling on without you.
Oh, yeah.
And you just, so you can't stop it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's, because as you said, one of the Buddha things is the, you know, one of the causes of suffering is states of consciousness.
Right.
You know, which I'm assuming is partly referring to that sort of thing.
Yes.
It's like a craving for your own experiences.
Right.
You know, so it's sort of.
But there can be situations, like certain people are expressed in a way that they experience these kind of bliss states every now and then, just automatically. See, it's all automatic. Like whatever is arising is just the movement of this larger event. So if it's the case that you're expressed in a way where these bliss states arise every now and then, that's great. But again, they just become part of the passing parade.
I wasn't talking about them being good, though. I was kind of thinking they're kind of disturbing.
Oh, okay.
You know, all those, and it's not just bliss either. It's sort of, you know, energy.
Right.
Lots of sort of stormy sort of.
So then I'm not clear exactly on what you're asking. Like if you're having these and you don't care for them, you find them disturbing.
Yeah, well, if if that's like a side effect of this kind of thing, or this kind of experience, or this kind of sensibility.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, maybe I'm not being clear about it. It seems as if, really, I just wanted you to say a bit, if you had anything to say about that. And
not really, because like it's not that this is necessarily a side effect of this particular perspective, because there are lots of people who have this perspective and they've never had an altered state. But it is the case that some people have this perspective, and part of how they're presented in life is with these apparent altered states, and they can, in some cases, be very pleasant, and in other cases they can be very disturbing. But it's also part of this great expression, and so again, it's unique for each person. So, like in my case, I had a propensity for these altered states of mind, but it seemed to need this desperate urge to explain life that was creating a kind of concentrated effort to break through the illusion in life, and that extreme concentration then seemed to trigger this inclination. But in other cases, it's what we would just consider straight biological makeup, biochemical makeup, that certain states of mind arise and pass away, and again, for each person it's different, and you will end up, like whoever is expressed in whatever way they're expressed, you'll end up having certain feelings about how, about those particular states of mind or moods, and you will also have a certain inclination as to how to relate to that or address that. And again, it's unique for each person. We have certain sensibilities or a certain perspective on what kind of feels to make most sense in certain situations. Sometimes we're simply very confused, but in a lot of cases, if we're given a wide range of options, we kind of have a feeling for one of them as opposed to another, and we might want to explore one as opposed to another. And it is ultimately just a totally unexplainable happening doing what it does. And you haven't even brought yourself to this point. Like, it's not a matter that you're working hard to understand existence and you've really worked hard to understand a non-dual sensibility. If you've been involved listening to non-dual presentations for a number of years, you have a non-dual sensibility, because you can't turn around and go listen to somebody else talk about life and feel that that's the true way of looking at life. Like, this is the only one that's making sense to you. Now, whether it's in your body and you're feeling oceanic, that's a whole other question. It's just, but the basic acknowledgement that life is a totally unformed, unexplainable event is your sensibility. Now, often I'm hearing now that, yeah, but that's just an idea, like, I want something more, and it's like, okay, maybe it'll give you more, maybe it won't, and maybe there'll be a moment that it feels like more, maybe there'll be moments where it feels oceanic. That seems to be the most general situation. There'll be moments where it feels really oceanic. It feels like you're carried in the great ocean of existence. And then 3 days later, you're thinking, like, how did that feel again? Like, what was that all about? Like
yeah,
I can...
What was the difference then between that, that stuff that goes on and on all the time, and someone like Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was there?
Nothing. He didn't live in any oceanic bliss all the time either.
No, but he was always there, just like all of us are always here, relatively speaking, but there was something just a little bit different.
Okay.
Otherwise, he didn't go to the meetings, people came to him for the meetings.
Right.
Yeah.
He just had this absolute certainty all the time. And I don't know how you get that absolute certainty all the time. Like, I have that absolute certainty all the time. Doesn't matter whether I'm caught up in thought or not, or life feels like it's separated or not. It's just absolute certainty that it's just an undivided happening doing what it does.